Did you know the number one regret many seniors confess isn't about money, it's about the times they said yes when their heart screamed no? Think about that. After all the years of working, sacrificing, and giving, the thing that lingers the most isn't the lost paycheck or the missed promotion, but the lost moments of peace that were traded away in the name of duty, obligation, or guilt. That's the quiet thief of happiness, the endless yes that steals from your health, your joy, and your golden years. What would your life feel like if you finally set boundaries that kept your peace safe, boundaries that honor your time, your body, and your spirit? Before we dive deeper, pause right here. If this message is already tugging at something inside you, don't just watch silently. Hit that subscribe button, click like, and most importantly, use YouTube's new hype button. You can hype 3 videos a week, and every hype tells YouTube that seniors' voices matter, that your peace matters. It pushes this message into the feeds of people just like you, people over 60 who are searching for relief from the constant pull of everyone else's demands. So take a second, subscribe, like, and hype right now, because you deserve to protect your peace. Here's the truth most people won't admit. Many seniors were raised in a generation where saying no was almost unthinkable. You said yes to church committees because that's what respectable people did. You said yes to family requests, even when you were bone-tired, because parents and grandparents were expected to always be available. You said yes to favors, errands, extra shifts, even when your body was begging you to stop. And for a while, it felt noble. But over time, those yeses piled up, leaving you with resentment, fatigue, and sometimes even illness. That's the hidden cost nobody talks about. The way overcommitment robs seniors not only of rest but of dignity and choice. But imagine something different. Imagine sitting at home, sipping your favorite tea, and knowing that you don't owe anyone an explanation for resting. Imagine picking up the phone not because you feel pressured, but because you actually want to. Imagine going to bed at night without the heavy guilt of unfinished favors or obligations. That's the life boundaries can unlock. And here's the surprising part. Boundaries don't drive people away. In fact, the right people respect you more when you set them. Instead of resentment, relationships often grow stronger, because people finally see you valuing yourself. So let me ask you, what would change in your life if you started saying yes only to the things that truly fill your heart with joy? What if you realized that every time you say no to someone else's demand, you're saying yes to your health, your sanity, and your peace? Boundaries are not walls. They are gates, and you hold the key. Seniors across the US are beginning to discover that protecting peace is not selfish, it's survival. And those who take this step are finding something incredible: more energy, more respect, and more freedom than they've had in decades. If this is striking a nerve with you right now, take a breath and remember, your peace is sacred. Don't let the thief of endless yeses steal it from you. And before we continue, do your future self a favor. Like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear this truth, subscribe to Wise Aging Seniors, and hype it so more people over 60 can finally learn that peace is theirs to protect. Meet Eustace Holloway, 67, a retired bus driver from Ohio. For decades, he was the man everyone counted on. Neighbors relied on him to shovel their driveways in winter because he was always up early. His church knew they could call him last minute to cover events, and he would show up without fail. His children leaned on him for babysitting, financial help, and advice. To the outside world, Eustace was dependable, strong, the man who never said no. But behind his warm smile was a man carrying far more than he could bear, a man whose peace had been slowly chipped away by years of putting everyone else first. Eustace's story is one many seniors recognize. Raised in a generation where sacrifice was worn like a badge of honor, he believed that saying no was selfish and unkind. He drove city buses for nearly 4 decades, greeting strangers with respect, keeping calm in traffic jams, and giving up breaks so others could take theirs. By the time he retired, his body was worn, but his habit of self-sacrifice was stronger than ever. Instead of finally enjoying his freedom, he found himself busier than before. Relatives asked him to help with errands because you're retired, you have time. His church called more often than ever, assuming he could volunteer endlessly. Friends treated him as the one who could always lend a hand. At first, he went along with it. After all, wasn't this what a good man was supposed to do? stay useful, keep giving, stay needed? But slowly, the cost began to show. He was often too tired to enjoy the hobbies he once loved, like fishing on the lake or playing old jazz records. His blood pressure crept higher, his patience grew thinner, and resentment brewed quietly in his heart. Eustace never complained aloud, but he often lay awake at night wondering, when would his time belong to him? The breaking point came one afternoon when his granddaughter asked him to play, and he realized he was too drained to lift himself from the couch. That moment hit him harder than any overtime shift or sleepless night ever had. He saw clearly that he had spent so much of his life carrying others that he was failing to carry himself. His health was declining, his joy was slipping away, and the little girl who looked up to him wasn't seeing the grandfather he wanted to be, she was seeing a man too exhausted to live fully. That was when Eustace began to rethink everything he had been taught about duty and generosity. He realized that constantly saying yes hadn't made him a better father, neighbor, or friend. It had made him a man stretched so thin that his true self was buried under the weight of everyone else's needs. He began to see that boundaries weren't barriers, they were lifelines. For the first time, he asked himself a radical question: what if I started saying no, not because I don't love people, but because I love myself enough to protect what little peace I have left? Eustace's journey from overgiver to boundary setter didn't happen overnight. But his decision to change became the foundation for a new kind of freedom, one rooted not in endless sacrifice, but in balance, respect, and peace. His story is a reminder that seniors over 60 don't have to live as background helpers in everyone else's story. They have earned the right to be the authors of their own. Step 1. Recognize the cost of saying yes. Eustace's health began to decline in ways he couldn't ignore. At first, it was subtle, an ache in his back after yet another afternoon spent hauling groceries for a neighbor, a pounding headache after babysitting 3 energetic grandchildren long past his bedtime, a heaviness in his chest when he said yes to chairing yet another church committee meeting. For years, he brushed these things off, telling himself it was part of getting older, part of being useful, part of fulfilling his role as the dependable man everyone admired. But what he didn't realize was that each yes he gave was quietly taking something away from him. By the time he went to see his doctor for a routine checkup, the damage had begun to show. His blood pressure was higher than it had ever been. His doctor didn't mince words: "Eustace, you're under too much stress. If you keep this up, you're looking at serious health problems." That was his wake-up call, the moment when he had to face the truth, that overcommitting wasn't harmless, it was dangerous. It wasn't just about being tired, it was about putting his heart, his body, and his very future at risk. This is something many seniors face but rarely talk about. Saying yes all the time seems generous, even noble, but it comes at a cost that isn't always visible right away. Overextension steals energy, disrupts sleep, raises blood pressure, and wears down the immune system. And the irony is painful. The very people who give the most often have the least energy left for themselves, and their health pays the price. For Eustace, the cost was not only physical, it was emotional, too. Every time he ignored his own needs, he felt a quiet resentment building inside. He wanted to be present for his family, but instead, he was often too drained to enjoy even the simplest joys. The turning point wasn't just his doctor's warning. It was the realization that if he didn't start protecting his own peace, he wouldn't be around to enjoy the very people he was trying so hard to serve. What good is being the reliable neighbor if your body collapses under the pressure? What good is being the ever-available grandparent if stress robs you of the ability to play, laugh, and truly connect? Eustace saw that saying yes too often wasn't an act of love, it was slowly becoming an act of self-destruction. This is where the lesson becomes clear for anyone over 60, every yes carries a cost. Sometimes it's small, like lost rest or a skipped hobby. Other times, it's serious, like higher stress, weakened health, or emotional burnout. The trick is not to stop giving entirely, but to recognize that your health is not infinite, your time is not limitless, and your peace is not something you can afford to sacrifice again and again. So, think about your own life. Have you ever noticed how your body reacts when you agree to something you didn't really want to do? Do you feel tense, tired, or even sick afterward? These signals are your body's way of telling you that the cost of yes is too high. And if you've ever felt your health suffer because you couldn't say no, you are not alone. Step 2. Build gates, not walls. Eustace's biggest revelation came when he realized that boundaries were never meant to be brick walls shutting the world out. For years, he resisted the idea of saying no because he imagined it as closing doors on people he loved, leaving them hurt or disappointed. But over time, he discovered that real boundaries are more like gates. You decide when to open them, who to welcome in, and what to allow through. A gate doesn't make you cold or distant, it simply makes you intentional. And for Eustace, this shift changed everything. He used to say yes to every single committee at his church because he believed his absence would let people down. But the truth was, he often sat in those meetings drained, zoning out, or counting the minutes until he could leave. He was present physically, but absent in spirit. When he began to see boundaries as gates, he asked himself, which of these commitments actually fills me with purpose? Out of all the groups, there was one project he truly enjoyed, helping with the food pantry on weekends. So, instead of forcing himself to attend every meeting, he chose that one cause and gave it his best. The surprising result? Instead of feeling guilty, he felt lighter. His presence in the food pantry became more meaningful because he was giving from a place of energy rather than exhaustion. His fellow volunteers noticed the difference too. His joy was contagious, his laughter genuine, his focus sharp. By keeping his gate open to what nourished his spirit, he found that his yes carried more weight than ever before. And for the first time, he understood that boundaries didn't mean losing connection. They meant deepening the connections that truly mattered. This is something many seniors struggle with. The fear is always the same: if I say no, people will think I don't care. But Eustace's story shows the opposite. By closing his gate to draining activities, he had more energy for the ones he loved. He wasn't stretched thin, apologizing for being half present, he was fully there in the moments he chose. And the people around him began to respect him more, not less. Think about your own life. Where are you pouring energy into things that leave you feeling empty afterward? And what would happen if you treated your time like a precious garden, only opening the gate to what keeps it alive? That's what Eustace did, and it changed his perspective completely. He no longer lived with resentment or burnout, he lived with intention. This step may sound simple, but for someone like Eustace, it was revolutionary. Boundaries were no longer about rejection, they were about selection. And the freedom that came with that choice made him realize that life after 60 isn't about how many people you please, it's about how deeply you live the moments you choose. But the journey didn't stop here. Because when Eustace learned to guard his time with a gate, he stumbled into the hardest test of all, setting limits with the very people he loved most. That next step even shocked his children, and it forced him to face guilt he had avoided for years. Step 3. Learn to say no without guilt. For Eustace, the hardest boundary to set wasn't with neighbors, friends, or even the church. It was with his own family. When his daughter asked him to babysit 3 nights a week, his first instinct was the one he had followed for decades: say yes, swallow the exhaustion, and push through. But something in him shifted. He remembered the doctor's warning about his health, the heaviness he felt each time he overcommitted, and the clarity that had come from choosing only the commitments that nourished him. This time, instead of surrendering to guilt, he tried something different. He looked at his daughter and gently said, "I love my grandkids, but I need rest to stay healthy. I'll take them Saturdays instead." The words felt heavy in his mouth, as if they carried the weight of decades of self-denial. He expected disappointment, maybe even anger. But to his surprise, his daughter paused, then nodded with understanding. The first no stung, not because of conflict, but because it was unfamiliar. Yet what followed was respect. His daughter saw a father who valued his well-being enough to speak up, a man teaching by example that self-care isn't selfish, it's necessary. This was a powerful turning point. For many seniors, guilt is the single greatest barrier to boundaries. Saying no feels like letting loved ones down, like withdrawing love. But Eustace discovered that the opposite was true. By protecting his time and energy, he could give his best self to the people he loved, instead of a tired, irritable version of himself. His Saturdays with the grandchildren became richer, filled with laughter and stories, not overshadowed by fatigue. His daughter, instead of resenting him, began to respect the model he was setting, for her and for her children, that love doesn't mean endless sacrifice. Saying no without guilt requires reframing what no actually means. It's not a rejection of the person, but a recognition of limits. It's an honest admission, I care about you, but I also need to care for myself. Seniors who learn this find that relationships often improve, because honesty replaces silent resentment. And here's the truth, people may be surprised at first, but in the long run, they will respect clarity far more than compliance. Eustace began to use small scripts to help him. Instead of long explanations or excuses, he practiced simple, firm statements. I can't do that today, but I'd love to join you next week. I need to rest this evening, but I'll call you tomorrow. I care about this, but I can only commit this much. These phrases became tools, little shields that allowed him to say no without shame. They reminded him that boundaries are not about conflict, but about honesty and balance. Over time, he noticed something unexpected. His children and friends started respecting his time more, asking before assuming, and appreciating his yes all the more because it wasn't automatic. The lesson here is simple but profound. Every time you say no to something that drains you, you're saying yes to something that sustains you. For seniors over 60, this isn't just a choice, it's survival. Eustace learned that guilt fades, but the peace that follows a boundary lasts. And while that first no was the hardest, each one after became easier, opening the door to a healthier, happier version of himself. Step 4. Redefine family boundaries. For years, Eustace carried a quiet burden that many seniors know all too well, the unspoken expectation that once you retire, your life becomes an open resource for your family. He was the one his grown children called when they needed emergency childcare, the one who got tapped for loaning a bit of money to help cover unexpected bills, the one asked to step in whenever life felt overwhelming for the younger generation. At first, he didn't think much of it. After all, wasn't this what family was for? Wasn't this what a good father did? Keep giving, no matter how old his children became? But over time, that role shifted from helpful support to exhausting safety net. His days stopped feeling like his own. Instead of enjoying his hard-earned retirement, he found himself stuck in a cycle of responsibilities he thought he had left behind years ago. He loved his children deeply, but he began to feel like he was raising another generation of kids, only this time without the energy or patience he once had. Quiet resentment grew, not because he didn't love them, but because he couldn't remember the last time he lived his own life without interruption. The turning point came during a conversation with his son, who asked him to commit to watching the grandkids multiple times a week. Eustace felt the familiar tug of obligation, but something inside resisted. He realized that if he kept saying yes, he would never step out of the shadow of being a parent, and he would never fully embrace the joy of being a grandparent. That day, he said something he had never dared say before. I raised my children. I can't raise yours full-time, but I'll love them as a grandfather. It was a bold statement, and it felt risky. Would his son be disappointed? Would his family see him as selfish? The silence that followed was heavy. But then, something unexpected happened. His son nodded. He admitted he had assumed his father was fine with the constant demands, and hearing Eustace draw a line gave him clarity. That one statement redefined the relationship, not as a burdened parent still carrying the weight of responsibility, but as a joyful granddad who could give his time in a healthier, more meaningful way. From that day forward, Eustace's role shifted. Instead of being called at every crisis, he became part of intentional, planned family time. When he did say yes, his presence was filled with energy and joy, not fatigue and quiet frustration. His grandchildren began to associate him with fun, stories, and laughter, not with a weary man trying to keep up. The respect his children had for him grew, because they saw him modeling something they themselves needed to learn, that love does not equal endless sacrifice, and that boundaries are an act of wisdom, not rejection. This step is one of the hardest for many seniors. Family ties run deep, and the guilt of saying no to your own children can feel unbearable. But redefining your role is essential for peace. You are not failing your family when you set boundaries, you are teaching them to stand on their own, while still offering love and support in ways that don't drain you. The truth is, family doesn't need you to be available every second. They need you to be healthy, whole, and present when it matters most. Eustace's story proves that drawing this line doesn't destroy relationships, it strengthens them. By stepping back from the role of the ever-available safety net, he stepped forward into the role he truly wanted, a grandfather whose love wasn't measured in hours of unpaid labor, but in quality moments of joy. And in doing so, he discovered that family bonds thrive not on endless giving, but on honest boundaries that keep love free from resentment. Step 5. Set digital boundaries. Eustace never thought the biggest thief of his peace in retirement would be the small glowing screen in his pocket. 4 years, he answered every text, every late-night call, every chain of messages in group chats as if it were his duty. He felt guilty letting the phone ring or leaving a message unread, as though silence meant he didn't care. But the truth was, his phone had become a leash, tugging at him at all hours, robbing him of rest and quiet. He would sit down with his jazz records, ready to unwind, only to be interrupted by a buzz that demanded his attention. And instead of enjoying his evenings, he ended up scrolling through conversations he didn't need to be part of, feeling restless instead of refreshed. The turning point came when he realized that technology, while convenient, had blurred every line of personal space. Retirement no longer felt like freedom because anyone could reach him at any time. A friend expected instant replies. A family member thought a late-night call was no big deal. Notifications flooded his evenings like uninvited guests. Eustace realized he had let the digital world decide when his time ended and began, and in doing so, he lost ownership of his peace. So, he made a bold change. At 8 p.m. every evening, he silences his phone. Not vibrate, not just check once more, completely silent. That small act became a declaration: this time is mine. At first, the guilt tugged at him. What if someone thought he was rude? What if his family needed him? But he soon realized that most so-called emergencies could wait until morning. And the world didn't fall apart when he chose to step away. Instead, he found himself rediscovering the joys of his own company. He would put on his favorite records, let the saxophone fill the room, and breathe in a sense of calm he hadn't felt in years. He noticed his thoughts becoming clearer without the constant interruptions. He even started sleeping better because his mind wasn't buzzing with unfinished conversations or notifications. Slowly, his friends and family adjusted, learning that Eustace's evenings were his own. Rather than resenting him, they respected him more for valuing his time. This was more than a practical change, it was an emotional shift. For seniors, technology can be both a blessing and a burden. It connects us, but it also consumes us if we let it. Setting digital boundaries isn't about rejecting loved ones, it's about protecting mental space. It's about reminding yourself, and others, that your life doesn't have to be available on demand. You've earned the right to quiet evenings, to uninterrupted meals, to nights filled with laughter in your own living room rather than endless scrolling through group chats. Eustace discovered that digital peace was just as important as physical peace. Without it, his mind was always cluttered, even if his home was tidy. But once he chose to limit when and how others could reach him, he felt something he hadn't felt in years: control. Control over his own hours, his own attention, his own joy. That freedom became a gift, not only to himself but to the people around him, who now got a version of Eustace that was present, not distracted. The lesson is simple: just because technology makes you reachable at all times doesn't mean you have to be. Setting digital boundaries is not rude, it's wise. Seniors deserve to reclaim their time, their quiet, and their peace. And as Eustace proved, the people who matter most will understand and even admire your choice to live life on your own terms. Step 6. Protect your present from your past. Eustace's journey toward peace wasn't only about saying no to others in the present, it was also about confronting the weight he carried from his past. For decades, he had quietly replayed moments that filled him with regret: the times he didn't speak up for himself, the jobs he stayed in too long, the arguments he wished he had handled differently, the opportunities he let slip away. These memories haunted him like ghosts, showing up at night when he tried to rest or in the quiet hours when the house was still. They whispered reminders of what he could have done, who he could have been, and every choice he couldn't undo. At first, he thought this was just part of aging, that as you get older, you naturally live more in memory than in the moment. But he began to see that these old regrets weren't gentle reflections, they were chains holding him back. Every time he tried to enjoy the present, his mind pulled him into the past, stirring guilt, sadness, and a sense of unfinished business. And it wasn't just emotional. The stress weighed on his body, leaving him restless, drained, and unable to enjoy even the simplest joys of retirement. One day, after another sleepless night of replaying old mistakes, Eustace picked up a notebook and began to write. He didn't edit or plan, he simply poured out the memories, the regrets, the if-onlys that had been echoing in his head for years. Page after page, he wrote down the weight he had been carrying. And when he finished, he felt something unexpected, lighter. By putting the past onto paper, he had taken it out of his head and placed it somewhere it could rest. That night, he made himself a promise: my past can visit, but it can't live here anymore. This mental boundary became just as important as the ones he set with people. He realized that peace wasn't only about protecting his time from others, it was also about protecting his heart from himself. The past would always exist, but it didn't have to define his present. By journaling, by forgiving himself for what he couldn't change, and by choosing to focus on what was still in front of him, he began to reclaim his life. For seniors, this step can be the most difficult. It's easy to carry decades of should-haves and could-haves. But living in regret robs the golden years of their shine. Protecting your present from your past is an act of courage. It means accepting that yesterday cannot be rewritten, but today is still yours to shape. It means telling yourself, as Eustace did, that the past can knock on the door but it doesn't get to move back in. Over time, this boundary freed Eustace's heart. He laughed more, slept better, and felt joy in small things again. Instead of sitting in silence with regret, he shared stories with his grandchildren, turning what once hurt into wisdom. He discovered that letting go didn't mean forgetting, it meant choosing not to be trapped. And in protecting his present, he found the peace that had eluded him for years. Eustace's story shows that the deepest boundary seniors can set isn't with others, but with themselves. Because when you stop letting your past own your present, you finally step into the freedom that aging was always meant to bring. Today, Eustace's life feels lighter, not because the demands disappeared, but because he finally learned how to carry them wisely. His days no longer feel dictated by guilt or expectation. Instead of exhaustion, he wakes up with energy, knowing that what fills his calendar are choices he made with intention. His health has improved, his blood pressure lowered, his sleep more restful, because he no longer pushes himself past his limits just to keep others happy. The constant resentment he once carried has dissolved into a sense of freedom, and the quiet strength he gained from boundaries has brought him a deeper respect from everyone around him. What surprised him most was how people responded. For decades, he feared that saying no would push loved ones away. But the opposite happened. The neighbors who once leaned on him for every little task now thank him sincerely when he does say yes, knowing it's a true gift of his time. His children, instead of assuming he's endlessly available, now respect his boundaries and even tell him they admire the example he sets. His grandchildren don't see him as the tired man on the couch anymore. They see a joyful granddad who shows up fully, with laughter and stories, because he has the energy to enjoy the moment. Setting boundaries didn't push people away, it drew the right ones closer. This transformation wasn't about cutting people off or living selfishly. It was about finally realizing that peace is not something you stumble into, it's something you protect. By treating his time, his health, and his emotional space as sacred, Eustace discovered the kind of freedom that many spend a lifetime searching for. He proved that after 60, the greatest gift you can give to yourself and to others is the version of you that isn't weighed down by obligation, but lifted up by balance and choice. And this is the lesson for every senior. Boundaries aren't about shutting doors, they're about opening the right ones. They allow you to love more deeply, laugh more freely, and live with the dignity you've earned. Your golden years are not meant to be drained by constant demands, they are meant to be lived with joy, purpose, and peace. Boundaries aren't selfish, they are sacred. Protect your peace, and you protect your golden years. If this touched you, hit like right now, it tells YouTube seniors matter. Don't just hype this video so more people over 60 learn their right to peace. And subscribe to Wise Aging Seniors, because after 60, peace is the wealth no one can steal.